They said these photographs should never be seen. Locked away for more than a century. Hidden from history. Hidden from you. No names. No records. Only pale bodies on cold tables. And men in dark coats, watching, waiting. One of these men is still alive today. And he knows that you're about to see what he tried to bury forever. Welcome to Historia Unseen. I'm John, your voiceover artist for this channel. And this is a story you were never meant to hear. In this story, you will see photographs the world was never meant to see. Pictures so disturbing, so hidden, that those who took them disappeared without a trace. And tonight, you will find out why. Now the rest of the 30-second hook. They were locked in a wooden box for over a century. The images inside showed pale bodies on cold tables, strange iron frames, and men in dark coats watching silently. History erased them, but these pictures survived. And one of the men is still alive, still watching. And he knows you are about to see what he tried to bury forever. The year was 1908. Europe was changing fast. Empires rose, borders shifted, and whispers of independence filled the air. In a small cobblestone town, far from the capital's noise, life moved slowly, until the day a strange iron tower was built in the open square. No one knew its purpose. It wasn't a monument. It wasn't for industry. It stood there like a silent guard, with ropes and hooks dangling in the wind. Among the curious onlookers was Robert Wallenberg, a young photographer known for capturing the soul of a city through his lens. He had photographed kings and peasants, weddings and funerals, but he had never seen anything like this. Rumors spread. Some said it was for testing new scientific medical techniques. Others claimed it was a military experiment. And a few whispered something darker, a ritual from the old days, when blood and iron were used to bless the birth of a nation. Wallenberg was drawn to mystery like a moth to flame. He began to take notes, sketches, waiting for the right moment to bring his camera. That moment came on a cold morning, when men in black coats arrived with wagons. The townsfolk gathered, not with excitement, but with unease. The wagon doors creaked open. Inside were bodies. They were pale, perfectly still, stripped of clothes, and laid on wooden tables. Not a single wound, not a drop of blood, as if they had simply stopped living. Wallenberg's hands trembled as he lifted his camera. The men in coats positioned the bodies beneath the iron frame, tying ropes to their wrists and ankles, lifting them just an inch above the tables. It was too precise, too deliberate. It felt less like science, and more like ceremony. An older man, with a heavy mustache and sharp eyes, seemed to be in charge. He never touched the bodies, only gave quiet instructions. When his gaze swept the crowd, people looked away quickly. No one wanted his attention. Wallenberg clicked the shutter. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound almost lost in the cold air. Each photo he took felt like stealing a piece of forbidden truth. But as he worked, he noticed something. The bodies were all young adults, but their faces were peaceful, almost smiling. It was then he realized something that made his skin crawl. Their eyes were not fully closed. They were watching. The rope creaked as the men adjusted the tension, measuring angles, making notes. A small group of observers, wealthy men in fine coats, stood behind the tables. They didn't look at the bodies like doctors or soldiers. They looked at them like property. Suddenly, a faint sound broke the stillness. A breath. Wallenberg froze. He leaned closer, his camera ready, and saw the chest of one of the bodies rise, just slightly, as if taking a slow breath. He stepped back quickly, heart pounding, trying to mask his reaction. The man with the mustache looked directly at him. For a moment, the world went silent. Then, almost imperceptibly, the man gave a small smile. A smile that said, "We see you." The ropes were tightened. The observers nodded. And in that moment, Wallenberg knew, whatever this was, it was not for medicine, and it was not for the public eye. When the session ended, the men untied the bodies and carried them back to the wagons. No one spoke. No one dared ask where they were going. Wallenberg packed his camera, his hands still shaking. He had captured something that could not be explained, and he understood why no one had ever seen these photographs. As the wagons rolled away, the man with the mustache gave one last glance over his shoulder, and for a reason Wallenberg could never explain, it felt less like a warning, and more like a promise. Days passed, but Robert Vollenberg could not stop thinking about what he had seen. The pale faces, the half-closed eyes, the faint breath, and most of all, the man with the mustache. He tried to convince himself it was nothing, just his imagination. But at night, when the town was quiet, he would dream of the ropes swaying, the hooks glinting in the cold air, and the faces staring right through him. On the third night, he decided to develop the photographs. Inside his small darkroom, the images slowly came to life in the chemical trays. The first picture, the iron frame towering over the cobblestones. The second, the bodies, stretched and restrained. The third, he stopped. In the background, between two of the observers, a shadowy figure was watching. Not part of the crowd, not one of the men in coats, just watching. Robert leaned closer, his eyes adjusting. The figure seemed blurred, almost transparent, as if it didn't belong to the moment at all. The next morning, he carried one print to a local historian, an old man named Jacob, who had lived in the town his whole life. Jacob studied the image in silence, his brow furrowed. Finally, he whispered, "This place, it is older than the town, older than the church. Before there was a country, before the wars, this square was a place of gathering, and not for prayer." Robert asked him what he meant. Jacob's voice dropped to almost nothing. They called it the choosing ground. According to Jacob, every few decades, a secret ceremony would take place here. The chosen were not criminals, not soldiers, not volunteers. They were selected by unseen hands, taken from their homes, and brought to the square. No one knew what happened to them afterward, only that they never returned. Robert felt the air grow heavy. He wanted to ask if Jacob was joking, but the old man's eyes said otherwise. Later that week, Robert returned to the square with his camera, hoping to find clues. It was empty. No iron frame, no tables, just cobblestones, and the faint marks where the heavy legs of the frame had once stood. As he was about to leave, a voice spoke from behind him. "You should not be here." Robert turned. It was one of the men from the ceremony, a younger one, tall, wearing a bowler hat. His eyes were cold, his smile polite but without warmth. "We are not angry," the man said, "but curiosity can be dangerous. For you, and for those you care about." Robert swallowed, gripping his camera strap. "I'm just a photographer," he said. "I record history." The man's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "History," he said softly, "is written by the ones who survive it." Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into a narrow alley. That night, Robert checked his darkroom again and found something impossible. The photographs he had left on the table were gone, all except one. It was the same image he had seen in the darkroom days before. But now, the shadowy figure in the background was closer, and its head was turned toward him. Robert Vollenberg did not sleep that night. He sat in his small apartment, the last photograph lying on the table in front of him. The shadow in the picture was no longer standing far away. It was now in the center of the frame, only a few feet from the camera's point of view. The detail chilled him. Its face was still blurred, but there was the faint outline of a mouth, and it looked like it was smiling. The next morning, Robert packed his camera and decided to leave town for a while. He would visit the capital, sell his wag, and put distance between himself and the strange events. But when he arrived at the train station, he noticed something unsettling. Two men in dark coats were already there, the same style of coats as those from the ceremony. They weren't looking at him directly, but he could feel their eyes following his every move. He boarded the train, hoping the movement would shake them off. Yet, at every stop, when he glanced out the window, he saw one of them on the platform, standing still, watching. By the time he reached the capital, Robert felt the weight of eyes on his back wherever he went. At the market, in the hotel lobby, even in the reflection of a shop window. It was always the same tall man in the bowler hat, the same cold, polite smile. One night, as Robert developed a roll of film from his recent travels, his hands froze. Among the pictures of busy streets and city lights, there it was again, the shadow. But now, it wasn't just blurred. It had shape, form, and detail. A man's face, pale, hollow-eyed, wearing the old style of clothing from decades ago. He was standing in the background of a photo Robert took in the capital's main square. A photo taken just hours earlier. Robert's heart pounded. This wasn't just someone following him. This was something else. The next morning, he tried to visit the newspaper office to sell his story. But when he arrived, the editor told him, "We can't publish this. The man you're talking about is not in our records. And Mr. Vollenberg, no one in this city has heard of you before." Robert laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. But then the editor slid a newspaper across the desk. On the front page was a small article. Local photographer missing for 3 weeks, last seen boarding train to capital. Robert stared at the date. It was yesterday. Robert left the newspaper office with the paper still in his hand. The headline burned in his mind, "Missing for 3 weeks." How could they say that? He had arrived in the capital only 2 days ago. His first thought was to check the truth for himself. He went to the city archives, a massive stone building filled with dust and the smell of old paper. Inside, rows of ledgers held every birth, death, and marriage for decades. He searched for the names of the people he remembered from Jacob's old stories, the chosen who had vanished from the town. Nothing. It was as if they had never been born. Finally, his hand shaking, he searched for the victims he had photographed on the cold tables. But the records were empty. No names, no death certificates, no trace at all. The archivist, a tired old man with thick glasses, glanced at the photo Robert showed him. His face went pale. "This is not possible," he whispered. "These people do not exist in our records. And this building in the background, it was destroyed 40 years before this picture was taken." Robert's mouth went dry. Destroyed 40 years before. That would mean the photograph captured something from the past. He left the archives quickly, gripping his bag. Every step echoed in the empty street outside. The city suddenly felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. At a small cafe, Robert sat down and took out his camera. He pointed it casually at the street and clicked. A woman walking her dog. 2 men talking by a lamppost. Nothing strange. Until he developed the photos in his hotel room that night. In the first frame, the woman and her dog. In the second frame, the 2 men. And in the third, the same street, empty, except for one figure standing in the center. It was the shadow man from before. Pale face, hollow eyes, only now his head was tilted, like he was curious. And in his hand, he was holding one of Robert's photographs. Robert's pulse hammered in his ears. He looked at the photo again, closer this time. The photograph the figure was holding was of Robert himself, sitting in the cafe only hours earlier. The hotel room felt colder. The shadows seemed to move in the corners. Robert locked his door, but deep down he knew. Locks were useless against something that could step into a photograph. That night, he dreamed of the Iron Tower again. But this time, he was the one on the table. And the ropes were already tight. Robert woke with a stat, his heart pounding. The dream had been so vivid. The cold table under his back, the coarse ropes biting into his skin, the shadow figure standing above him. It felt less like a dream, and more like a memory he wasn't supposed to have. The morning light did nothing to calm him. He decided to leave the capital, to disappear before whatever this was caught up to him. But when he stepped into the street, he froze. Across the square, there it was. The Iron Tower. It stood exactly as it had in his first photograph. Tall, black, and skeletal, with ropes and hooks swaying in the wind. But this wasn't his town. This was the capital. And no one else seemed to notice it. People walked past as if nothing was there. Children played nearby. But Robert saw it clearly, its shadow stretching unnaturally across the cobblestones. He lifted his camera with trembling hands and snapped a picture. The moment the shutter clicked, the air changed. The street noise faded, replaced by a low hum. The sunlight dimmed, even though the sky was clay. And then, the ropes began to move. One by one, they lowered themselves toward the ground, swaying gently, as if searching. Robert stepped back, but his feet felt heavy, like the air itself was holding him in place. From behind the tower, figures began to emerge. Men in black coats, their faces pale and expressionless. And at their center, the man with the mustache. He walked slowly, his boots clicking against the stone. "Mr. Vollenberg," he said, his voice low but sharp. "You've been busy." Robert's mind raced. "Why me?" he asked. "Why these photographs?" The man smiled faintly. glancing at the ropes above them. "Photographs are doors," he said. "They open both ways. And you have been opening too many." Before Robert could respond, two of the pale-faced men stepped forward. They each held a rope, and as they moved closer, the hooks glinted in the strange dim light. Robert stumbled backward, fumbling for his camera, his only weapon. He took another photo, the flash bursting in the darkness. And just like that, the tower, the men, the ropes were gone. The street was bright again. People bustled past, unaware of what had just been there. Robert stood frozen, his camera still warm in his hands. He looked down at the new photo. The image was dark, blurry, but there was no tower. Instead, it showed a close-up of his own face, eyes wide, mouth open, as if someone else had been holding the camera. That night, Robert sat in his small apartment, every light switched on. The curtains were drawn tight, the door locked twice. His camera lay on the table in front of him, but he didn't dare touch it. He kept replaying the man's words in his head. "Photographs are doors. They open both ways." Somewhere outside, a clock struck midnight. The room seemed to grow colder. The glass of water on the table trembled slightly, as if something heavy had moved in the floorboards beneath him. The lights flickered. Robert's eyes shot to the photographs pinned to the wall, his work from the last few months. And his heart stopped. In every picture, the shadow figure was closer than before, standing in doorways, at the end of streets, behind crowds. In the last photo, taken just that afternoon, it was right outside the cafe window, watching him. The flicker came again, longer this time, the room plunging into near darkness before the light snapped back. Robert gripped the edge of the table. Then he heard it, a faint creak, like someone stepping slowly across the wooden floor. But the sound wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from the wall of photographs. He stepped closer, his breath shallow, and then he saw it. In the center photograph, the shadow figure moved. Its head turned, slowly, until its hollow eyes locked directly onto him. The air grew heavier. The glass of water fell from the table and shattered. And before Robert could run, the figure stepped out of the photograph. Its body was thin, unnaturally tall. The pale face stretched into a smile that didn't belong to any living thing. The edges of its coat fluttered in an invisible wind. It stopped just a few feet away, tilting its head as if studying him. Robert tried to speak, but no sound came. The figure leaned forward, whispering in a voice that sounded like paper tearing. "One more picture, Robert, just one more." The lights went out, darkness swallowed the room. For a moment, Robert didn't know if his eyes were open or shut. The blackness felt thick, almost alive. He could hear the slow, deliberate breaths of the figure standing in front of him. Then, a blinding flash. His vision swam, spots of light dancing in the dark. Somewhere in the room, the faint whir of his camera echoed, but Robert hadn't touched it. When the lights returned, the figure was gone. The photographs on the wall were gone. Only his camera sat on the table, a single fresh print lying beside it. Hand shaking, Robert picked it up. It was a black and white image of himself. He was sitting in the same chair, in the same room. Only behind him stood the iron tower, its ropes swaying gently. And on one of the tables beneath it was another photograph, too small to make out clearly. Robert leaned closer, squinting, and then his blood ran cold. The tiny photograph within the picture was of you, your face, your eyes, staring back. The print slipped from his hands, drifting to the floor. The room seemed suddenly colder, and somewhere, very faintly, came the sound of rope tightening. The narrator's voice dropped to a whisper. "Some history is hidden not because it's forgotten, but because it's waiting for the next name."